Hi, I'm Darcy Venencosa, destination wedding photographer, founder of the Path Workshops, and business coach to ambitious entrepreneurs. And here's another video to help move you along your path to business success. Today we're going to talk about how I meter and expose for 4 different film stocks. As many of you know, I shoot on a medium format film camera, and I use a lot of different films depending on the weather and the client's skin tone. So the first thing that you need to shoot film is a light meter. This is a really good one. It's a really nice one. You might not need one so fancy. It's called a Sekonic L508. The film that I use the most of is Fuji 400H. When the film has a number on it, like 400, it means that you set your meter to 400. And then you would hold the meter out, meter the light, and it would tell you how to set your aperture and shutter speed. With Fuji, however, I do not meter it at 400. I changed the ISO on my light meter to 200. It will sound confusing at first, but if you just remember Fuji 400H, set it to 200. Then when I'm metering someone, I meter for the shadows and I hold it down with the bulb in like this. And that's how I would meter. If they were away from the light, like this. Like this. So Fuji 400H, you set it 200 and you meter with a little bit of a 45-degree angle in front of the shadows of your subject. The reason that I love Fuji 400H is because it tends to have a little bit of a pinker tone to the colors, and I really like that. I would use this film on the majority of my clients unless they actually looked a little bit like me and super rosy. I would not use a pink film on myself. I also find that it is the best for my Asian clients as well, as the other Kodak brands of film can go a little too yellow. So Fuji 400H, it's my go-to film. It's the one I'm most comfortable with. It's the one I shoot all the time. And most of the work that you see on my Instagram is with Fuji 400H. So this is Portra 800, which is my second film that I use the most. I use it when Fuji 400H is not going to work, and that is mostly indoors and in low light situations. This film is one of the most versatile types of film. You can meter it at 200, at 400, 640, and even box speed. Though most of the time it's metered at box speed, it does look a little bit underexposed unless you're right by a window light. I personally set it right in the middle at 500. 500 is a very happy place for me to shoot this film, and I love it. I do the same thing. So you have your light meter, and again, Portra 800, which means if you were following it literally, it's an 800 speed film, which means you would set your light meter at 800. However, I want my film to be a little bit overexposed, so I set my meter to 500. So we set it to 500. With Portra, I do still keep the bulb in, but I do meter it a little bit more up and down, and I don't need to curve it the way that I do for Fuji. So if I was shooting my client indoors with Portra 800, I would just hold the light meter just like this, get a reading, and set my aperture and shutter speed to that setting. This is a great film to use for people with darker skin tones. I find that Kodak really brings out beautiful color in darker skin tones. It's not my favorite for my Asian clients because it does tend to go very yellow if you overexpose it or get it in the wrong kind of muddied light. The other kind of Portra film that you can use is Portra 400. Now, I don't shoot a lot of this, but I've seen how to do it, and I use it sometimes as a backup when the store doesn't have enough Fuji. Portra 400 is really simple. It's pretty much shot at box speed, which means it's a 400 speed film and you can shoot it at a 400 speed. However, I still like to have just a little extra light in it, so I set my meter to 320. I do pull out my bulb especially if we're in bright sun, because I want that bulb to read the light sooner, and I would hold it straight up and down in front of the client where the shadows are. So that's Portra 400. Now we're gonna talk about some black and white film. My favorite black and white film to use is Ilford 3200. It's a 3200 speed film, which means it does great in low light and indoors. In fact, I don't think I've ever shot this film outside. I use it during receptions, during the first dance, and oftentimes when you're doing a sexy boudoir shoot or something more indoors and you want to really capture a specific mood. It has a lot of grain to it, but I love that. So if you want to make it really light and bright, you can meter it at 1600. That means half of its speed. So if it's 3200, you would set your meter at 1600. And I generally just do a general reading into the room like this, bulb in, and get a reading. If your room is really dark and 1600 is making it so that your shutter speed is too low and you're worried about the shake of your camera and getting blur, you can rate it at 3200. Usually if I'm rating it at 3200, I tell my lab to give it a stop push. So when you push film one stop, that means that they're just leaving it in the development a little bit longer so it gets just a little bit more overexposed. It does create a lot more contrast and it does create a little bit more grain. So I try to shoot it at 1600 where I can. And finally, the last film is Kodak 400 Tri-X. So this is a 400 speed black and white film. It's what I do all my outdoor black and white work in. So a lot of times I love to play with this film in really bright sunlight and get those epic shadows. But it can also be shot indoors. When I shoot it indoors, I like for it to have a more contrasty look. So I actually take it and underexpose it. I will set my meter at 1250 instead of 400. And then when I send it to my lab, I ask them to push it 2 stops. Here's my favorite example of that look. You can see that his face and her body have much more contrast than this picture, which is what I shot at normal speed. So I metered it at 400, exposed for shadows, and that's what this looks like. As you can see, it's a little bit more artistic when you actually underexpose the film and ask your lab to push it. I prefer that look a lot better. But in sunlight, I shoot it straight at 400, meter towards the sun, have my bulb out, and go to town trying to get those dark shadows because I don't want those overexposed. Again, that was how I meter lots of different types of film. If none of those numbers made sense to you, go back and start studying f-stops and shutter speeds, and then take on this film video. Was this video helpful? Make sure to subscribe and then head on over to darcybenincasa.com and leave your comment in our creative community. And remember, travel the world, make money, and take action.